Welcome back to Homesteading with the Zimmermans, where we work hard and play hard on our little corner of land in Iowa. My husband and I were born and raised Old Order Mennonite, or horse and buggy Mennonite, as some refer to them as. And although we are no longer part of that culture or community, we are intentional about passing on the old-fashioned skills of our childhood to the next generation. Hello everyone, it's Ruth Ann Zimmerman here, back with another video this week of how we cook from our larder, and I'll have recipes in the description for you. And as you can tell, my office is Grand Central Station for wedding planning. We are 2 weeks out from my daughter's wedding. So things are very, very busy around here. I got a lot of positive feedback from last week's video, but one of the top questions that people or comments is overwhelmed, like how to get started. And so real quick before we jump into the main part of the video where I'm showing you recipes, I'm going to just give you a couple little tips on how to get started in cutting down your grocery bill and cooking more from scratch. Every week or every month, however often you go to the grocery store, choose one item from your grocery list and decide that you're going to fit that into your cooking routine. Or it can be something as little as starting with making your own homemade ranch, and then stick with it until you find a recipe that your family loves, and this is a big one for me, that's simple enough that you can fit it into your routine without it taking up a whole lot of brain space. Because when you're learning a new skill, it takes up brain space, and that's often what makes people say this is too hard, is because they're already maxed out with, all the other things they have going on, and then trying to add something else to it is just overwhelming. But here's the thing, if you stick with it, it will eventually become second nature, and you'll be whipping up homemade ranch dressing without using barely any brain space, because it's now second nature to you. So if you choose one thing from your list and then don't add another thing until you feel like you've mastered that first one and that one has become second nature. Somebody on Instagram tagged me in a post, and she said she chooses 3 things a year. So if that's more your style, and maybe it's a white sauce or the cream of soups, and maybe you need to take a whole year to become comfortable with it, where it doesn't take up a lot of time and space, and especially brain space, and you'll be making cream soups and white sauces just like I do without much thinking. So just give yourself the time that you need to master something. Mastery looks like it doesn't take up a lot of your brain space. You can do it while you're parenting. You can do it while you're visiting with, your family. And it's second nature. That's what mastery of a skill looks like. So give yourself time to master a skill. Don't try to add them all in 1 month or 1 week. Don't try, mastering pasta and bread and, all the other things. Don't try to do them all at once. We all started by just adding one thing at a time, and it accumulates over time until you find yourself not needing to go to the grocery store near as often. And also, do you remember the giveaway in last week's video? Don't forget to stick around to the end of the video to find out who is the winner of that beautiful collaboration with Carolina Cooker. So it is Monday morning, and on the priority list for today, or for this week, is making some sourdough bread. But before I can get started feeding my sourdough starter and discarding to get it up and active, I've got to do something with all of this sourdough discard that's been hanging out in my refrigerator, because I have a rule for myself that I cannot have more than 1 quart jar full of discard in my refrigerator at a time. So we are going to make some sourdough crackers, and I've got the link for this recipe and the video showing how to make them in the description for you. I used to make these crackers all the time just by heart and didn't need to look at a recipe, but it's been about a month since I made them and I kind of forgot the recipe and it looks like I added too much butter. So instead of being nice square crackers, because they didn't spread as well, they are more of a rustic looking cracker. But the family will enjoy them just the same, and this jar of crackers will be gone as soon as the children get home from school because they will eat them all for snacks. So the next thing that I'm going to make with my sourdough discard is some sourdough pasta. Because I've got some chicken left over from the weekend, I am going to make some chicken noodle soup. And I have a recipe for sourdough pasta already here on YouTube, and I'm going to link that one in the description for you as well. So the sourdough pasta dough has rested on the counter all afternoon. It's actually fermented all afternoon. So now as the children fold the laundry, I am going to roll out the pasta for our chicken noodle soup tonight. So when I've got it rolled out as thin as I can, I'm going to hang it to dry, just because that makes it much easier for me to cut it without it all sticking together. You'll know when your pasta sheets are dry enough to roll up and cut because they will feel a little bit dry to the touch. But about an hour is what I give mine. Here, yeah, I don't want them big and fat. You want to cut them nice and...
Oh yeah, you can feel them. Ha! I didn't break it.
You did it. Good job. Don't smash it. No, don't smash it.
Can I do 2 more?
Yeah, you can do 2 more. Make them nice and skinny. Look on this side. Look on this side. There you go. Not too skinny or they'll break.
Oopsies.
So because I was busy writing when the family cleaned up from this chicken dinner that we had, the whole chicken bones and broth and everything got put into the refrigerator. And normally if I would have been putting it away, I would have, separated everything for, future use. But it's not a big problem. Here is what I'm going to do to get all the broth from this chicken. I'm going to use very hot water, and I'm just going to rinse all the broth from this meat. And I'm just going to rinse that broth down into the pot that I'm going to use to make my chicken noodle soup. And then while I wait for my broth to boil, I'm going to separate the meat from the bones of this leftover chicken. I like to take my chicken noodle soup to the next level by sauteing some onions and carrots and garlic in butter before adding it to the soup. I always saute the onions for a while before I add my carrots and garlic because my carrots and garlic will tend to scorch if I add them too soon. So once my broth is boiling or almost boiling, I'm going to add my pasta, making sure none of it is stuck together. And then I'm just going to boil it until it's tender to my liking. And that entirely depends on how thick or how thin you rolled your pasta. So once my noodles are cooked soft, I'm going to add all of the chicken that I picked off of the bones. So Mitchell and Maxwell are leaving for basketball practice right before we sit down to eat supper. So they are going to eat earlier than the rest of the family. So I am going to town to have some coffee with my sisters and my mom who is visiting. And before I go, I'm going to put 2 of our homegrown hams from the freezer into the Instapot. And I'm adding quite a bit of water because I want a lot of broth for making soup. And I'm going to put those in the Instapot for an hour. So while I was in town, getting coffee with my sisters and my mom who's visiting, I decided that I might as well grab some groceries. So I spent $50. I bought 2 bags of water softener salt, and then I got some napkins that we needed. I stocked up on our favorite snappy popcorn, and the bananas looked good, so I got some bananas. For the children to put in their lunches or just to eat for breakfast. I got 2 big bags of tortilla chips. The children like to eat these with the salsa that we can. I got some little oranges for their lunches. And then I got some lettuce because we are experimenting with different salad dressing recipes for that upcoming wedding that we've got in 2 weeks. So I got some lettuce so that we can try out another kind of salad dressing to see what the bride and the groom think. And then also bought a pint of blueberries, but I ate most of them already, so that was my snack. And that's what I got for groceries this week. So the children are home from school, and it is Hadassah's night to make supper for the family. However, since she's already mastered peeling potatoes, that job falls to the little boys, and she will dice and cook the potatoes for our ham casserole. I'm helping Hadassah make her white sauce here. Oh, that smells so good. Keep going. Keep going, little more, little more, little more. Okay, that's good.
That's a lot more than 3 cups.
Yeah, you're right, it is. Okay, then you keep stirring that and heating it until it gets thick, and you taste it and add salt and pepper until it tastes right, okay? So although it is Hadassah's job to make supper for the family tonight, I'll stick around to support her, especially since she's fairly new to making white sauce. The ham has been in the Instapot on low for, most of the day. And I'm going to get out 1 piece of ham and chop it up because that's what we'll need for our casserole. So while we wait for the white sauce to thicken, the potatoes have cooked soft, and we're going to drain those and layer them into the pan. And then we're also going to add 2 quarts of green beans. So on top of that, we are going to layer all of our chopped ham. So our white sauce is now ready, and we're just going to pour that on top of all of the other ingredients. So the original recipe for this ham and green bean bake called for cream of celery and cream of mushroom soup. But I am going to link the video with the recipe for how we replace all canned cream soups with homemade cream soup or a white sauce. Next, we are going to put this casserole straight into a 350-degree oven for about 30 minutes. However, if you made it ahead of time and put it in the refrigerator, you will need more like an hour to heat it all the way through. So after 30 minutes, the casserole is thoroughly heated, and I'm just going to push some of these pieces of ham down under the white sauce so that they do not dry out anymore. So all that's left in the bottom of my jar of sourdough crackers is some crumbs. So I am going to top this casserole with those cracker crumbs. You could use some crushed Ritz crackers or breadcrumbs or even some crushed saltines just to add some texture. And we ended up being only 6 of us instead of the 9, 10, or 11 that we sometimes are. So there will be plenty of this casserole left for eating later in the week or even to put in the freezer. So with that other piece of ham that I want to use to make some ham and bean soup later in the week, I am just going to put it in a bowl along with all of its broth, and we are going to put that in the refrigerator. So while I hang out in the kitchen keeping the boys on track with their dishes, I am going to mix up my pre-ferment because I'm finally going to make some sourdough bread tomorrow. So we've got a little bit of a late start this morning, mainly because the children do not have school today due to a funeral that is at our church, and our church is also our school. So I've got butter in the churn, and I'm going to get my sourdough bread started. And then once I've got my bread going, then we will focus on cleaning up the kitchen. So the older children went to the funeral, so it's just the 3 little boys and I in the kitchen this morning, and they worked in shifts to help me get all the dishes done. And because they knew they would have the rest of the day to play without having schoolwork to do, they worked fairly cheerfully, and we got it done in no time at all. I think that the beautiful sunshine trying to stream in through my dirty windows is what inspired me to use up the rest of the morning to clean some of my windows thoroughly. And I will link last year's deep cleaning video in case you want more information on how we deep clean our farmhouse. So before we head out for our afternoon piano lessons, I am going to shape the bread and put it into the loaf pans for its final rise. And hopefully it will be about just ready for baking when we come home. So because I did not get my pasta dough for our spaghetti dish tonight started before we went to town for piano lessons, mostly because I was distracted with cleaning windows, I have to hurry up and get it done after we come home from town. Now that our bread is in the oven, we're going to get started with our skillet spaghetti. And we're going to start with 2 pounds of ground beef, and we're going to brown that in our skillet. And then I'm going to start working on the pasta dough. So because I only had about 20 minutes for this dough to rest and for the gluten to develop, it's actually really hard to roll out. But that is just a price I have to pay for not making my pasta dough a priority earlier in the day. So when our beef is all ground, we add approximately 2 quarts of water to our big pan and bring it to a boil. We make sure at this point that we have the seasonings added that we want, mainly salt and pepper, and then we add our pasta. And then we're just going to simmer this pasta until it's tender, and we are going to do that with it uncovered. So now that the pasta is tender and most of the liquid has evaporated or boiled away or been soaked up by the pasta, we're going to add our pasta sauce that we canned last fall. And I'm, of course, cooking for a crowd, so I'm using 2 quarts of pasta sauce to go with my 2 pounds of meat and my double recipe of pasta. So now we're just going to simmer this all together for a couple more minutes. You could add some cheese if you want, but we are off to our Bible study tonight, so I did not have time to grate some cheese, so we're just going to eat it without cheese. So along with our spaghetti dish, we also want to have a salad, and I'm going to make a homemade dressing. And if the bride and the groom like this homemade dressing, then this is the dressing that we will serve with the salad at their wedding. So I made a mess by trying to slice my bread while it was still too warm, but we sure did enjoy having bread with cinnamon and honey butter as a side for our spaghetti and salad meal. So on Thursday morning, I am going to slice the bread and put it in the freezer. We like to slice our bread before we put it in the freezer because it makes thawing it so much easier. And we're not worried about it getting dried out or freezer burnt because we always eat it within 7 to 10 days anyway. I'm also going to mix up a gallon of chocolate milk. This recipe is basically 1/2 cup of very hot water, 1/2 cup of unsweetened cocoa, and 1/2 cup of sugar. And then I add a bit of vanilla and salt as well. So ham and bean soup is on the menu for tonight. So the little boys are going to get started with peeling some potatoes. So tonight is normally Mitchell's night to cook supper, and I was going to kind of coach him on making this soup, but then he offered to do some outside work in the barn, in the pig pen, instead of cooking this supper, and I said, sure, I will cook supper and you go do the outside stinky, messy work. So I have 2 cups of dried navy beans, and I'm going to rinse them with cold water and put them in my Instapot. So with the 2 cups of dried beans, I need 6 cups of liquid, and I am going to use some of the ham broth from the other night, but I'm going to save most of the broth to cook my veggies in. So to my beans and broth, I'm going to add about a tablespoon of salt, a teaspoon of black pepper. I added some onions and garlic, and then we are going to cook them at high pressure for 30 minutes. So I'm going to use my heavy bottom soup pot, and in the bottom I'm going to put in some of the fat from the ham, and then I shredded some carrots and fine chopped some onions, and then I really love to use fresh celery when I make ham and bean soup, but I'm also trying to work my way through this dried celery from last year's garden. So we're just going to saute that all in the bottom of this pot before we add our broth and potatoes. So now to get my broth from my ham, I'm going to use the same method that I did with the chicken earlier this week. I'm just going to dump it all into a strainer over top of my pot that has my sauteed veggies in, and I'm just going to rinse it with very hot water. So now I'm going to dice the potatoes that the boys peeled for us. So then we're going to add the potatoes to the broth, and while they cook, we are going to chop up our ham. So then when the potatoes are soft, we add the ham and the beans to the potatoes and the broth. And any liquid that's still left in the beans, when they're done in the Instapot, I just throw that all into the soup. And just like Grandma taught me, I leave the bone in the soup for extra flavor. So sometimes we will make cornbread to go with our ham and bean soup, but tonight we are going to take an easier route, and we are going to just make some garlic toast to go with our soup. Well, that brings us to the end of this week's video, and the winner of the giveaway is if you would please reach out to either me or Carolina Cooker, and we will get all the necessary information from you. Next week, I think we will do a video of breakfasts that we eat during the week from our larder. And then after that, it's the week of the wedding, and I cannot promise I will have a video that week. But then I would like to do a video of getting your kids involved in the kitchen and preparing meals. So if you have any questions for me about that subject, please drop them into the comments, and that will give me an idea of what that video should contain.